just tuning in, welcome. Very soon, we'll be introducing our guest today. We are talking part 2 of education reform in Dominica. We will look at the facts and get your professional opinions on the matter. We will be speaking to an educator, former educator, and a social scientist. And if you're tuning in while enjoying your lunch, welcome. All right, Dominica. Talk on the Block is sponsored by ESA Trading Limited and New India Assurance. We'll be back. Let's take a break.
Great news for moms, dads, retailers, and wholesalers. At ESA Trading Limited, we're proud to bring you the world famous Giggles brand of baby and adult care products trusted around the globe, now right here in Dominica. From diapers to pull-up pants and gentle wet wipes, Giggles is quality you can count on at unbeatable prices. Our Giggles baby diapers are soft, comfy, and leak-proof, keeping your little one dry and happy, whether it's playtime or nap time. Available in the following sizes: size 2, 10 pieces, size 3, 9 pieces, size 4, 8 pieces, and size 5, 7 pieces. With stretchable side airs, ultra soft layers, and a super absorbent core, they're made for movement and mess free days. And our baby pants, they're just as comfy, perfect for active toddlers. Giggles Baby Pants, available in sizes 3, 4, 5, and 6. Need wipes? Try our Giggles Baby Wipes. Gentle on delicate skin, strong on messes. And for adults, Giggles Adult Diapers and Pull-Ups offer the dignity and comfort your loved ones deserve. One sizes and prices to suit every need. Extra large, medium, and small. Giggles Adult Pull-Up Pants, extra large, and medium. So whether you're shopping for your family or stocking your store, ESA Trading Limited through our Giggles brand of products has you covered. Giggles, comfort and love packaged together. Available at ESA Trading Limited. We are making a difference for you.
Dominicans, Dominicans, enjoy your property, protect your property. You homeowner and businessman, protect your property, enjoy your property. Can't wait for the hurricane, can't wait till you flood again, can't wait till your roof fly out and all your business coming out. Remember, no insurance company will insure your property when a storm is approaching. Get ahead of the hurricane season. Insure with a company who gives you the assurance of payment for your valid claim. Come speak with us today at the New India Assurance Company Limited, upstairs AC Shillingford and Company Limited, 24 King George Street, Roseau. Bring along an up-to-date valuation from a qualified engineer and get insured today.
And we're back. So we're talking education reform part 2. And with me, on the line with me, is a social scientist, former educator, Simeon Joseph, who will be giving his professional analysis on the government's effort to pursue education reform. Sorry. But by way of introductory remarks, let's go to Mr. Joseph right now. Good afternoon, Mr. Joseph. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Richie. Good afternoon to your listeners. Good afternoon, Dominica.
Fantastic. Let me just thank you again publicly for taking the time and coming on the program to enlighten the audience, if you will. I hope the day has been going well.
Thank you. So far, so good.
Okay, so let's get into it. Just before I do, though, I want to play a statement recently made by the Prime Minister as it relates to education reform. Let's have a quick listen.
We are speaking of reform that is more focused on the curriculum and the programs we offer to better cater to the diverse needs of our children. So as part of this reform process, we will look at everything. How we teach the basics, literacy, numeracy, science, social studies, but also how we nurture the whole child. We need to build critical and analytical skills to nurture a culture and spirit of collaboration and cooperation among our children. We want our children to have opportunities in sports, in music, the arts, and the long talked about civics. It's not just about to pass an exam, but to grow a well-rounded individual. So far from the notion that has been espoused by some about scared say no sports in school, no arts in school, I want to make it very clear to everybody. I want you to be missionaries when you go out. That Scarrett said he wants to see more sports in school, more arts in school, more music in school. He wants to see children in the primary school doing agriculture in a practical way. He wants the children at the school being able to do some basic tiling, to expose to those things, and carpentry and masonry, and going to the communities and interacting with the senior citizens, knowing Dominica. Am I very clear, class?
That was the Prime Minister of Dominica, Roosevelt Skerrit. Simeon, your introductory remarks.
Well, I don't know what you mean by introductory remarks. I can only respond to that. First of all, by and large, I think what the Prime Minister alluded to has a lot of substance to it because he began by speaking about catering to the needs of all students, and I think that is at the heart of any educational reform. So based on a face value of what he has stated, one cannot respond negatively to that because, he makes a good bit of reasoned statements in articulating what you call areas for reform. So that would be my initial response to that.
Okay, so given your experience in the education sector, how would you assess the government's current vision and direction for education reform?
Richard, that's a very general statement. That's a very general question, and it can be assessed on various. Education is not something that can be surgically dissected from the point of view of just pinpointing certain elements of it, because at the heart of education, there are several elements to education. But if we're talking about education reform, my first thing in the Prime Minister's statement, if I were to critique it, is when one understands reform, and people use education reform quite frequently and quite freely. I want to say three things about it. The education reform process in Dominica began in 1997 with we had the Basic Education Reform Project, or BERP, as it was called, in 1997 onwards, which when the Prime Minister entered into government, he was Minister of Education and was able to oversee some of it. So education reform is an ongoing thing. Throughout history, going back as far back as Plato, there's always been the need for some form of reform or the other in trying to advance education in trying to expand the opportunities for people. When one looks at the history of education, a historical overview of education will tell you that over the centuries, and particularly in the last century, there have been many diverse, varied, and developmental changes in the process of education. And education reform is nothing new to Dominica. When we go back to the days of Clifton Dupini and people like Mr. Will Stratmore Stevens, people like H.L. Christian, even people like Charles Maynard when he was Minister of Education in the early 1980s. All of these ministers as Minister of Education spearheaded reform, education reform in one way or the other, to suit the needs of the growing population, of the changing society, of the dynamics of learning, of the societal needs of students, etc. So all of these people ushered in some form of reform or the other. The question we have to ask is, what does education reform mean and who should spearhead it? I am utterly surprised that the Prime Minister is the one articulating that. It leaves me to question, where is the Minister of Education? Never before in the history of Dominica has the Prime Minister had to articulate education. It means, therefore, that perhaps the Minister of Education is left wanting. And while he has made some very valid points, my question is, on what basis are we talking about education reform? Because education reform is not an existential process. It is a highly empirical process. And so if I were the Prime Minister and I were to speak about education reform, the first thing I would do is do a review of the education reform that began in 1997 to see and examine what were the accomplishments, what were the gaps, what were the achievements, what were the shortcomings, to examine whether or not the education reform of 1997 met the mandate, the targets, and the expectations then. So you do a gap analysis. Secondly, what you would have to do in order to talk about the areas for reform, because he seems to have been just speaking off his head, off the top of his head, one would have had to have, first of all, have some kind of data collection. One would have to look at, do some focus group studies. One would have to do some investigative inquiries into different sectors of education, educational leadership, administration, curriculum management, and all the aspects of curriculum, student learning, discipline, parental involvement, community involvement, and look at all the different areas. So one would have had to, first of all, have a process whereby you would want to have a meeting with teachers and find out what are the concerns, what are the areas that they think need review or overview or that kind of thing. You would have to meet with your principals, secondary separate and primary separate, and perhaps collectively. One would have to look at universal secondary education to see 20 years hence, how is it working? Has it worked? What are the shortcomings? What are the lack of or the achievement gaps in universal secondary education? One would have to look at all the assessment procedures that have been put in place. And I would dare say that over the past 20 years, there have been several policies that have been tabled, that have been written, and that have been presented to the Ministry of Education. So somebody has to do the research and see what has happened to all these policies. There have been policies in literacy. There have been policies in numeracy. There have been policies in school administration. There have been policies in sports and recreation and extracurricular activities. There have been policies in educational leadership and teacher training and teacher professional development. There have been policies in special needs and literacy and numeracy. Where are these documents? Who is going to study them to look at what has become of those policies and research studies to determine where is reform needed. It cannot be the articulation of a grandstanding of a prime minister who, at his whims and fancies, wants to go on the radio and articulate where he thinks education reform should take place based on the utterances of the public. Okay? And I don't think that. So one has to look at the entire education system. What is happening if we have to talk about reform? Because education reform, simply put, encompasses a variety of efforts aimed at improving learning outcomes in schools, okay? And these efforts would seek to address systemic issues within the education system to ensure that all students, regardless of their background or their socio-economic situation, have access to a high quality learning. And so this debate surrounding there's a debate surrounding the content of what makes learning high quality. But the focus must remain constant in the sense that education reform means continually improving schools to create educated individuals and an educated society. That is the purpose of education. That is the objective of education. Education is not for educational institution. Education is for society. And so one would have to look at education reform and because education reform directly impacts our society's future, the minds and aims to provide our children with vital skills and knowledge.
Yeah.
And so, when we're talking about education reform, that's what we have to look at. Okay? If we look and we go back, way back to maybe the 17th century, and so you could see that over the years there have been many early efforts from people like maybe Mann, anybody knows, who is considered the father of American education, okay, and who because of his advocacy for education, he laid a groundwork for what we call the current system of education, and particularly the professional training of teachers as we have it today. Then we have the progressive era of education in dealing with the 19th and the 20th centuries, which marked a significant period of education reform, okay, where curriculum requirements were outlined and where standardized tracking of education was outlined. And we have, of course, prominent educationists like John Dewey, who championed the idea of experiential learning, which emphasized the importance of teaching students how to think critically and to solve problems rather than simply memorizing facts, which unfortunately is a lot of our education that happens in that. Then you have the 20th century reform efforts. But one of what has to be considered very sharply is when we talk of education reform, there are key components of education reform, because a full scope of education reform would demand an understanding of range of goals. Key components of education reform is things like curriculum standards, teacher development, school choice, assessment, and school accountability, and the integration of technology in schools. And so when we talk about education reform, we have to look at all of those things. How skilled are our teachers? How skilled, how ready are our teachers in terms of making sure that they are skilled to lead successful schools and students?
But
then we have to look
not to
at
cut you
school
off,
choice.
not to cut
Yeah,
you
go
off,
ahead.
but to support what you just said. Educational reform, it's a broad thing, and if you're going to reform that sector, you have to look at everything, which would require some form of data analysis, data collection, etc. We haven't
Yeah.
that Mr. Joseph has not been made available
Well,
or
that is
public to the
seriously
media.
lacking, because that is seriously lacking. That's why he said it cannot be the top of the head thought of the Prime Minister. The question is, it is not mature, it is not responsible to just talk about reform at the top of your head based on what you're hearing on the streets on the ground. The question is, where is the data? You know, where is the research?
But
How have we come to that point?
In the absence Yeah, go ahead.
As I will say, maybe we do need education reform in Dominica. I will say we do need education reform in Dominica. Particularly, one can say 25 years after the first basic education reform project and universal secondary education. A review of that should have taken place 10 years ago.
10 years ago.
There has never been a comprehensive review of universal secondary education in Dominica. We implemented universal secondary education in Dominica in 2000, and the ministers of government or the Ministry of Education has never sat down and have a comprehensive review of universal secondary education in Dominica. Is it working? Because universal secondary education is a very good thing. In the 20th century, 21st century, you cannot have 14 and 15-year-olds live in primary school without having access to secondary education. The world today demands that every child must be exposed to some level of secondary education. But the question is, what kind of secondary education? We still have our secondary schools in Dominica, which are basically CXC manufacturing factories. By and large, that is what our CXC or our secondary schools are in Dominica today. There are institutions where students go in from primary school and we prepare them for CXC. Can they think critically? Can they think analytically? What attitudes and aptitudes and skills do we teach students to prepare them for the wider society? And so what we have is students entering the state college who are not even ready for the state college because their thinking, reasoning, research, intellectual skills are still very much at the secondary level. And we do have, especially the more premier, the elite, more elite schools in Dominica who still exercise streaming methods where they boast about the academic successes of students. I'm not sure if you have been looking at the graduation ceremonies that have taken place over the past month, and it leaves the question: what is the purpose of secondary education? People have to understand secondary education is not about achieving CXC grades. It's about taking a young person as a child from grade 6 at the age of 12 and giving them an opportunity to grow into mature adults at 17, 18. That is what secondary education is about. And so the curriculum for secondary school ought not only to include academics. Okay, many of our students have poor social interactive skills. Some of them can't even have a proper conversation.
That's true.
That is what secondary school is supposed to do, to prepare a child to become an adult.
True.
Unfortunately, in Dominica, and that's why people make this foolish statement of saying, "Oh, their children were not ready for secondary school."
But how do they become ready, Simeon?
But how did they become ready? That is where, again, if we're talking about reform, we have to have review. Before you can reform, you need to review. Let us review our primary school system. Let us review our preschool system.
Yeah, and that data needs to be made public.
Yeah, what are the gaps and inefficiencies in our preschools, okay, that do not adequately and properly prepare our children for primary schools? What are the gaps, the inefficiencies, the shortcomings, and the inadequacies in primary school that do not adequately prepare children for secondary school? Because you see, secondary school is an input from primary and preschool. So you would have to review that first before you can reform. Before you can change anything and say you're going to reform anything in preschool, you have to look at what is happening in preschools, right? Go do a cadastral and a thorough research and do review with parents, with teachers. Are the majority of our preschool teachers capable and ready and adequately prepared to teach children in preschool? When we look at our primary schools, what happens in our primary schools in terms of the different cognitive, emotional, mental, and social development and skills that young children have to develop, so in order for them to learn effectively. There are children who are leaving primary school today who cannot read and write adequately, and we say they shouldn't go to secondary school. That is a primary school problem. That might be a preschool problem. On top of it, there may be socio-economic factors which contribute to those things. And so if we're talking about reform, we cannot only look at what is taught in schools. We have to look at societies we have to look at the demographics. Has there been a demographic survey in Dominica to say, okay, children who come from these schools and this area do better than children who come from this area? Children who come from certain socioeconomic do better. Where is the research? Where is the research? If we have to have any substantive, healthy, productive reform in Dominica, it has to begin with that empirical process whereby people can say, well, okay, based on what we are seeing, based on what we have reviewed, these are the areas for reform. You know, I can tell you, Richie, many of our primary schools principals in Dominica don't even know why they are primary school principals. Okay? And what is the objective of a primary school principal? One can even say that for our secondary school principals. Recently, I saw that the government removed somebody from primary school and put them as a principal in a secondary school. Now, the curriculum management in a primary school is totally different from curriculum management in a secondary school. The assessment procedures and evaluating procedures of a primary school are totally different from that of a secondary school. The administration and management of leadership of a primary school is totally different from that in a secondary school. You are taking the teacher from a primary school and put her to head one of the major secondary schools in Dominica. How is she going to provide that level of educational leadership within the secondary school setting that is able to make that secondary school thrive? What is she going to learn in the process? I don't doubt the abilities of anybody, but again, that leads to many questions. When the Prime Minister is talking about education reform, what is the training that is happening for principals? What is the ongoing training that's happening for teachers? You know, what level of professional development is happening to prepare our teachers to become effective educational leaders? You know, I listened to a graduation ceremony not too long ago, and I'm hearing the principal saying in a report she's praising her teachers for assisting students in debates and quizzes. And her statement in her address was, the teachers were helping the students in debates and quizzes in addition to all their work of teaching students. Clearly, that shows a lack of an understanding of that principle of what the role of a teacher is. Because a teacher's responsibility is not only to teach academics. They are there to help children to learn how to debate. They are there to help children to learn how to be involved in art. They are there to assist students in being involved in other activities. And so that exposed a total lack of understanding by that principle of the duties and responsibilities and the expectations of a teacher, if you understand what I'm telling you.
Yeah.
So, and that is why I'm speaking about that in education reform, we have to look sharply at teacher development. Because skills teachers lead to successful schools and students. And so you have to look at improvement in teacher training and professional development and your evaluation systems for your teachers. You also have to look more specifically at how your teachers become certified and what is the developmental, in other words, what is developed to attract and retain talented individuals in the teaching profession. Because we still have a lot of incidents where people who are particularly in the private schools in Dominica, I would dare say our Catholic schools, where teachers are transitionary. They come in from college, they're given a job at convent and SMA and those places, they're on their way to doing something else, you know. And so the question is, in the education system, what reform is going to take place to retain talented individuals in the teaching profession? Because teachers play a crucial role in the success of education reform. Their skills, their knowledge, and their dedication directly impacts student learning. If you don't have teachers who are skilled, knowledgeable, and dedicated, you know, you will not have a positive impact on students' learning and achievement. And so, therefore, in the reform, I didn't hear the Prime Minister mention anything about investing in teacher development, which is essential. You cannot have proper curriculum management if your teachers are not properly developed, okay? And what kind of support mechanisms are in place, you know? And one has to say, and I want to go on that a little, because professional development for teachers takes various forms of how you do that. It has to be preliminary. It has to be ongoing. It has to be based on evaluation. It has to be based on coaching. It has to be based on mentoring. Okay, because an effective education system provides constructive feedback that helps teachers identify areas for improvement and professional growth. If you are in a school and that school environment does not have the right ongoing evaluating system where you can give constructive feedback to teachers to help them in the, improving their professional growth, you will not have effective teachers, and therefore you will not have good students, and your outcomes in education might be lacking. So that is what it is. And there are other things as well. In terms of education reform, you have to look at school choice. You know, parents. I think parents should be able to choose the best schools for their children. But school choice is a complex issue, and it's multifaceted, and that can be sometimes controversial. But it encompasses policies that allow parents to choose the educational setting for their children. When we look at students on the east of Dominica and the north of Dominica, they don't have a choice. All students on the north have to go to PSS. All students on the northeast have to go to St. Andrews. All students on the east have to go to Castleberry Secondary. All students on the south have to go to Grand Bay. In a real context of educational reform, you have to provide diverse options where students can have opportunities to enroll in a school of their choice, which will foster competition among schools and drive innovation and provide families with alternatives for education, for educating their children. So while there may be challenges with that system, what it ensures is equitable access to high schools for all students. Just when you have to think of how people label schools like Goodwill School, and I forget ITSS, all the children on the east have to go to ITSS. But we have to ensure that students have equitable access to high quality schools regardless of their background. And that's a critical concern, because we still have situations in Dominica today where some students are denied, okay, high quality education because of their background, because of where they come from. Is that going to be part of the education reform? And what kind of effective oversight and accountability mechanisms that go to ensure that all schools, right, provide a high standard of education? Why is it in Dominica that people are still rushing to send their children to convent and to SME? Why? Because they see the education they hire. Why should people not want to send their children to Goodwill School? And so when you're looking at school choice and access, the thing is, are we going to guarantee and ensure that in all the high schools in Dominica, there's high quality education for all schools, regardless of their background? You have to give effective oversight for that as well. Same thing for some primary schools. There's some people who fight to have their children, who will take their children from Salisbury and Coolibri and bring them to SMP or St. Martin Primary School because they feel that the education there is better. Clearly, that shows a lack. That shows a lack of confidence on the part of parents.
On that note, Simeon, let me just list some of the information that I found while doing some research in terms of the government's intention for education reform, and this is in spite of the fact that we do not have any data by which these goals have been made public. So this is the goal from the recent consultation that was held. This is the goals, guys. So 1, to streamline primary school curriculum. There's a focus on primary school there. So to streamline the primary school curriculum and promote life skills.
One at a time, before you move on to on what basis was this determined?
Again, we don't have the data, which is the point.
On what basis, if you want to streamline primary school curriculum, on what basis? What basis? Where's the data to
where's
say
the
that?
data? That's the $1 million question.
How are you going to identify what in primary school that needs to be streamlined and what needs to be strengthened?
Yeah.
How are you going to determine that? How are you going to decide where is that going to take place?
That information has not been made public.
You're talking about education reform, and I would dare say, with a Ministry of Education and an education department that is seriously dwindled based on the competencies, the qualifications, and the readiness and ability of education officers to even lead the education system in Dominica, far more to drive reform. When you look at what has happened in the Ministry of Education, I'm going to be very critical. Compare the Minister of Education now to Minister of Education of the past. Do you see that lady have any philosophy for education? Have you ever heard her articulate any policies for education? Have you? I mean, when you look at and when you look at even the education officers that have been brought into the Ministry of Education, most of them brought in because of political partisan influence without and over people who are more qualified to lead the education sector. When you look at the education planning unit in the Ministry of Education, I'm going to speak about it. Let's look at the education planning unit in the Ministry of Education. When this education planning unit was established in the 1990s, we had people like David Edwards, okay, a man with his master's in educational policy planning and practice and project management. You had people like Mr. Shillingford. You had people like Mr. Max Andrew. You had people who were trained and informed and educated in educational policy planning and practice. Then that department has been watered down to the extent today that someone was just offered the position with no training at all in education policy planning and practice. How is that person going to assist the Ministry of Education in any education reform? You have had senior persons in the Ministry of Education, from permanent secretary down to all other officers in the ministry, have been put to drive and lead the education development sector in Dominica, who, to my mind, need a lot of how you call it now, training and background to drive and lead the education sector. So that is. So when you're talking about streamlining the primary education in Dominica, where are we going to start? What are the areas that we're going to explore? What you said, streamlining the primary curriculum? What are you going to
streamlining the primary school curriculum and promoting life skills.
And are we going to commit the proverbial sin in education where we homogenize education? Okay? It is said that you do not homogenize education. You do not teach every child the same thing across the board, because education is to meet the needs of students. Okay? And have there been some kind of social survey to say, okay, primary schools in the Northeast should be exposed to a certain level of education at primary level so that they are better able to meet the needs of whatever is going. So, for instance, let's look at it. It's the international airport is being built, for instance. It's a major agriculture. Are they going to say, for instance, based on that, then let's look at what the primary schools are doing in Norfolk, because the airport is coming there, to see, okay, how we can begin early programs of intervention and orientation and introduction for students at primary school to cater to the needs of the coming international airport, in tourism, in hospitality, in customer service. Those basic things that can be taught at the primary school level, basic etiquette, which many Dominicans do not have. Okay, when you look on the West Coast, so are you going to say, well, okay, has that been done to say, okay, because they tell it you do not homogenize education, which is what many schools in Dominica have, and many schools are copycatting. So some principals see some schools are doing that, they copy and they do it too. And that's why I want to come in the primary. So we're talking about primary school children having to have haversacks in weight of caterpillars. I mean, it's just unimaginable when you see the books of some of these children in primary schools and number of academics at the expense of other means of learning. So when we talk about streamlining primary education, there has been no consultation. Let us not forget that there have been many policies. If you do your research, if you go to the office of the permanent secretary, if you go to the office of the chief education, you will see shelves and shelves and shelves of documents and policies that on literacy, on numeracy, on social studies, on civics, on everything that has been done and is sitting there never implemented. Money, millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars have been spent, by consultancies and all kinds of workshop upon workshop upon workshops, investment, and then what has become out of them. So we have been able to look at those things and say, well, okay, what are the proposals that were never implemented? What were the suggestions that were never taken on board? What were the policies that have been recommended that have never been fully implemented to its full term? Because you see, before they start one thing, they go into another. Their character counts. Then before that could finish, they move to this. Then before that could finish, they move to pearls. Before one, educational initiative is started in the Ministry of Education, they jump in on another one. And mark you, with all these programs that have been put in place, what is the monitoring? What is the evaluation? What is the review to see how effective, how successful those things have been? if you understand what I'm telling you. Then go to number 2. So when you talk about streamline, what you going to streamline? To streamline means to cut. What are you going to cut off?
Well, from what I see, they want to. Let me tell you, from what I see, they want to cut down from 13 subjects to a more focused set. For example, English, mathematics.
Out of the 13, which ones are you going to take out?
Well, we were not told that.
When you say you're going to review English, for instance, are you going to put in there debating skills, conversational skills, critical thinking skills, analytical skills, strength and comprehension skills? Are you going to do that? If you just cut enough subjects to teach the same thing, you're not going to have any success.
Well, on the list that they want to focus on, I see civics, music, sports, and oral assessments.
Yeah, but how are you going to do it? How many music teachers have we in Dominica?
Not much.
How many sports teachers? How many physical education we have? Before you do that, how many do we have music teachers for every school?
No.
Do you have physical education teachers for every school?
They are recycled from what I found out. They are recycled, Simeon.
But they're not even recycled. There's none. There's a lack. There are some primary schools in Dominica, Richie, without a male teacher.
Yeah.
So there is very little modeling for the males in the primary school. There are some male students in Dominica who go from preschool, primary school, and even secondary school without being exposed to a male teacher. Okay? And when you talk about bringing in more physical education and sports, is it going to be concrete operational physical education and sports where students understand physical education from the point of view of their physical health, eating the right foods, developing the right lifestyle? That's what physical education is. Not only jump and wave and stretch your foot and bend over. That's what physical education is. Right? Are we going to say, well, okay, if we're going to put health and family life education, what is it going to entail? And if we say we're going to streamline and take out some subject and put more maths, for instance, how is the maths curriculum going to be reviewed and expanded so that it gets our students to be able to have a better understanding of mathematics and arithmetic? Because there's a difference. Okay? There's a difference. If we say we're doing social studies, what are we going to bring into the social studies curriculum? Because by and large, our young people are growing up in Dominica without even knowing the names of streets in Roseau. or
that's true. That's
villages
true.
Properly.
Yeah.
Or those kind of things. When we talk about social, and is the social studies going to be real social studies? So you inculcate in the minds of the young people, the young students from a very early, that you are social beings, that you're supposed to be interactive. That's what social studies is. An understanding of your social environment, so you are better able to place yourself in understanding things like communication, different societies, different family settings. How do I fit in society? That's what social studies is. And there's a strong element of civics in social studies as well. So I mean, streamlining what? They can use a lot of nice words and articulate and pontificate and a lot of long sentences. The question is, where's the substance? Where's the beef?
Where's the beef? Let me just interject there, and you may know this as well. Currently, there's a revision going on, right, of the curriculum to equip future-ready and culturally grounded citizens on the OECS level. This is called OECS Pearl. And the OECS Education Sector Strategy Stress Curriculum Modernization Project, which seeks to integrate core national values, cultural identity, digital literacy, STEM, entrepreneurship, and inclusive education with early grade assessments and digital ecosystems integration.
Richie.
So my question is, just before you come in.
Richie, hold on. Based on what you said, in 1997, at the 18th meeting of the heads of government of CARICOM, they had something that they painted as the ideal Caribbean person.
Yeah.
In 1997, which was supposed to lead and spearhead education reform in the Caribbean. Now, there were, I think, 12 points that the education ministers and the governments of the CARICOM articulated as education and human resource development strategies for building a creative and productive workforce. And I'm quoting from that, right? It says, the governments and the education ministers of CARICOM propose that the ideal Caribbean person should be, among other things, one, imbued with the respect for human life, since it is the foundation on which all other desired values must rest. Two, is emotionally secure with a high level of self-confidence and self-esteem. Sees ethics, religion, and other diversity as a sort of potential strength and richness. Is aware of the importance of living in harmony with the environment. Has a strong appreciation for family and kinship values, community cohesion, and moral issues, including responsibility for and accountable to self and community. Has an informed respect for our cultural heritage. Demonstrate multiple literacies, independent and critical thinking, questions the beliefs and practices of past and present, and brings this to bear on the innovative application of science and technology to problem solving. Demonstrates a positive work ethic, values and displays the creative imagination in its various manifestations, and nurtures its development in the economic and entrepreneurial spheres in all areas of life. Has developed the capacity to create and take advantage of opportunities to control, improve, maintain, and promote physical, mental, social, and spiritual well-being, and to contribute to the health and welfare of the community and a country. And lastly, nourishes in himself or herself in others the fullest development of each person's potential without gender stereotyping, and embraces differences and similarities, which in females and males as a source of mutual strength. That was the picture that the ministers of education and the heads of government of CARICOM convened at the 18th meeting of the heads of government and CARICOM in 1997.
But this sounds very similar to what's being presented by the OECS in 2025.
So what I'm saying, here we are going 28 years later.
Are we cartwheeling?
This has been implemented and taken into consideration. If you ask the average Dominican principal, are they aware of that? No. If you ask the average Dominican teacher, are they aware of that? No. If you ask the average parent, has this been communicated to them? No. If you ask the Ministry of Education, to what extent these proposals have been infused in the curriculum in our primary and secondary schools in Dominica, they will ask you, where is it? And so you see, that is why I say we're talking about a reform module. Let's go back and see what we said we were going to do. Have we done it? How well have we done it? Did we do it or did we do it not? You know? And I think the sad reality for Dominica, and I'm going to say it, I don't care who's mad at me, that the current Minister of Education and the previous Minister of Education, more so him, were too cocky and were too high-horsed for their own good to lead the education sector effectively. Because if you look at the Education Act, and by the way, if we're talking about reform, may I just say that Division C, Section 9 of the Education Act says that there shall be an establishment of an education advisory board. It says the minister shall establish a body to be called the Education Advisory Board for Dominica. That is yet to be implemented. The Education Act has been used in so many other ways, but they are yet to put in place an Education Advisory Board for Dominica to spearhead and to govern education in Dominica. It says it shall.
Yeah, we touched on that last week. Yeah.
It even mentions the members and where the people should come from. Parent-Teacher Association, educational experts, principal teachers college, somebody in technical, vocational, and business, some organizations in industry and commerce, school principals, religious bodies, University of the West Indies tutor, religious community, and all. That has never been implemented. And it says that should be the main advisory body for the Minister of Education. And when you even look at the duties of and the responsibilities of the Minister of Education, because anybody who goes into Division A, Section 4 of the Education Act, and you examine the responsibilities of the minister, okay, or you look at the duties and responsibilities of the minister, the powers of the minister, you will see our ministers in Dominica have been woefully lacking, because Section 4 of the Education Act says the minister is responsible for the framing of an educational policy designed to give effect to the purpose of this act. Okay? So have they done it? Right? And to look at Section 4D, effective execution of educational policy of the government. And Section 4E, establish a coordinated educational system organized in accordance with the Act. And Section 4.2, encourage the development of basic knowledge and skills in all persons, including literacy, listening, speaking, reading, writing, numeracy, mathematics. And anybody who has a copy of the Education Act can go and look for that. That is where it is. Technological skills, creative arts, personal health and fitness, creative use of leisure time, where students can, and there I would encourage anybody to look at the Education Act. So when people talking, maybe the first thing they should do is review the Education Act. Maybe that's the first thing they should do, and ask themselves, when you're talking about it, from have the ministers been fulfilling their responsibilities under the Education Act, exercising their powers or what have their powers been executed, using their powers for, to determine which political, political stool should become principals of school, because there have been a lot of that in the system over the past 10 to 15 years, where people who are more qualified to be principals have all been overlooked, and people who are supporters of power reps and so are the ones who have been made principals of schools. There are numerous examples where the chief education officer and so have recommended competent, qualified, capable teachers for the position of principals, and they have not been given the positions. Instead, you have teachers who have been made principals, so sometimes they didn't even prepare a lesson plan, or most times absent from school. And I'm saying that now, anybody who wants to doubt me or come after me can come, but they will get more information after they come after me, because they'll get incremental doses of reality and facts if they want to question what I say. So again, we have to look at those things carefully when we're talking about things. What is the second point they said that they want to think, Richie?
From what I see, the second point relates to infrastructure, building modern and inclusive and climate resilient infrastructures, such as multimedia rooms, auditoriums.
Don't forget, Dominica was supposed to be the world's first climate resistant country in the world. You saw the grammar school collapse. Yeah. Okay, and I don't want to say much about that, especially that auditorium.
Yeah, it's a serious matter.
Especially that auditorium as it relates to Simeon Joseph. Okay, and I heard the minister say that she's going to have a group of people to look at the causes for the roof to collapse.
To run an investigation.
But the question the minister has to ask herself is, have the Ministry of Communications and Works and the Ministry of Education been involved in the consultation for the building of the Dominica Grammar School? To what extent? To what extent has the because when the Basic Education Reform Project was established, and that unit was established in the Ministry of Education, was to ensure that when schools are being built, the codes were respected, the standards for construction were taken into place, the expectations for facilities management and development were considered in the design and construction of buildings. And what has become of it? The person, as I said, who's head in the planning unit knows nothing and can give no advice. Okay? And neither the person who was there before, because they are political appointees. And I'm not afraid to say that. I have nothing against these people. Some of them are friends of mine. But I will say, as much as they are friends of mine, they will need to be honest and ask themselves how capable, ready, able, and knowledgeable are they to fulfill the tasks that they are doing. Okay? And so when we're talking about education reform, there are lots of things to be considered. Yes, infrastructure. Have you seen some of the infrastructure that some people are building, like the Chinese, for instance? There have been some good schools that have been built. There have been some remarkable buildings that have been built. But when you look at some of those buildings, you ask yourself, according to 21st century standards, and according to international codes and expectations for educational buildings and schools, are those things taken into
one of the focuses?
But apart from that, when we're talking about construction, and we're talking about climate friendly. So while we're talking about streamlining the curriculum, and the second point has to do with what do you call it? Structural. What was it again? What was
Infrastructure.
Infrastructure. When we're talking about the infrastructure, what is going to go in there? How many art rooms? How many drama rooms? How many music rooms? How many auditoriums? Okay? How many non-academic classroom, resource rooms are going to be in there to say, well, look, when you streamline the curriculum, right? The layout and structure and content of the building falls in line with what you're streamlining the curriculum under. Okay? How many schools in Dominica have playgrounds? How many schools in Dominica have a basketball court or a netball court or a cricket field or a football field? How many schools in Dominica have access to those things? If you want to talk about physical education and sport, how many schools in Dominica? If you go to Guadeloupe, if you go to most of the countries around the world, almost every school has a gymnasium. Almost every school has a tennis court and a football field and a basketball field. And then almost every school has that.
Mm-hmm.
There are schools in Dominica today with none of that. Look at Wesley High School.
Yeah.
Right? Look at Roseau Primary School. Look at so many schools in Dominica. You're talking about streamlining and structure. The structure goes with the curriculum. Because the structure of the school is to meet the needs of the curriculum of the school and the needs of the students. So, I will say reform is good. But when we're talking about reform, what are we talking about?
Wow. Let's take a few calls. I see some calls coming in, and let's take this call. Caller, you're live.
But today,
Welcome.
hi Richie and your guest. I must say it's quite an interesting conversation, an informative conversation. I listened to part one, previously, I think it was last week when you had the gentleman on. And the thing that always baffles me here, because even returning here to Dominica was based on and coming back actually in the criminal justice system. But the thing that baffles me is that there are many things that are on paper saying that it's to be implemented, but at this point, nothing is implemented. So my thing when the gentlemen speak about following through, following up, who is supervising, who is navigating, it's like, who do we go to? What are we doing? If you're saying that it's law or it's been passed or whatever, but nothing is implemented. And that is why Dominica is the way it is, because yeah, we have all these laws or yeah, we have all these programs, but if you don't implement them on a show, so it's just saying you have them on paper for show and nothing is really being done. So it's just great because I was in the education system too. And when he speaks of playgrounds on school and certain things that should be implemented in schools to make it a complete learning environment, it should be. And there's none of that, like no playgrounds and, no basketball courts, no stadiums. Like we're just housing these students, and, they're just in academics, but their social skills are not being built. Developed, I should say. But thank you for the conversation. I'm listening. It's very informative. Yeah.
All right, caller. Wow. We'll take your calls, I think, a bit after Mr. Joseph wraps up. And we're back. We're back with Mr. Joseph. Mr. Joseph, the caller was basically complimenting your contribution this afternoon. I must say, very profound. There are more questions I do have for you, but I suspect this may spell out part 3 of this discussion.
Well, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. Well, well, Richie, yes. I mean, I will dare say that I will support the call for education reform. But we have to know what is the significance of education reform, right? First of all, as a preamble, let us understand that the world is changing, and schools need to change with it. Okay. As long as society changes, because education is a societal construct. Okay. Education is not a piece of paper construct. It's not a certificate construct. It's not a 5 CXCs and a 10 CXCs and a bachelor's or master's construct. It's a societal construct. And so because the world is changing, schools need to change with it. And education reform is a vital balance as it needs to address the shortcomings and evolving needs of an educational system, and ensuring that educational system meets the demands of a changing world. And so the significance of education reform lies in its potential to improve students' outcomes. I want to repeat this. The significance of any education reform lies in its potential to improve students' outcomes. It has to promote equity, which is far we are yet to see in Dominica, and prepare students for the future. Because let us not look it. Even when you look at the people who head government and so they send their children to the best of schools, the elite schools, okay? Most of the ministers of government send their children to private schools. They don't send them to government schools. Is that an indictment on their belief in the public system in Dominica? That's a question we have to ask. To me, that's a significant question. Mm-hmm. When we really look at it, most of the elite, most of the government ministers, I think even the prime minister, these people don't send their children to public schools. They don't send their children to school. They send their children to private schools. Are they therefore telling the rest of Dominica that the public schools in Dominica are not on par or up to standard for what they expect? Now, if you are saying that the public schools in Dominica are not on par or up to standard with what you want for your children, what are you doing to ensure that it reaches on a level so that your children and other people's children can get the desired results that they want? And above all, education reform is to prepare students for the future. And so when we talk about promoting students for the future in education reform, how is education reform going to promote equity and social justice? Okay? How is education reform going to address the disparities in access to high quality education? Okay? Or provide a level playing field for students from different socio-economic backgrounds? Okay? Which can lead to greater social mobility for students following their education and will overall lead to a more equitable society. You will not have an equitable society, right, if our students do not have the opportunity for greater social mobility based on the fact that you have a level playing field where students of any socio-economic background can access high quality education. Because in Dominica today, we're still telling certain people of certain background that in Goodwill School they have to go. And there are certain elite schools who still will not accept certain students into their schools because of their academic thing. And that is a major problem. So how is education reform going to promote that? How is it going to ensure that every child in Dominica has the same access, opportunity, and availability for high quality education so that we can create an even playing field for students with different socioeconomic backgrounds, which could lead to greater social mobility, remove poverty, right? Remove economic underprivilegedness, remove social substandards, all right? Which will lead to a more equitable society. Malaysia has showed that.
As it relates to Simeon, as it relates to access, I can tell you part of this consultation, what came out of it, with the government of Dominica was the goal to expand access, but not for secondary-based students. This is actually tailored only to early education support, and then a changing in the scholarship policy plans for tertiary education.
Well, I mean, these are just policy things that would just maybe have good public relations, really. You know, for the government to look good. When the government says they're going to give more scholarship, I mean, it's only so that for them to look good, to say, well, okay, we were giving 20, now we're giving 40, we're giving 100. No. First of all, do you know that in a healthy, productive, advanced education system, there'll be no need for scholarships because all children will be obtaining at the optimum. They'll be learning at a very high level. If we reach a situation in Dominica where every student in Dominica is able to achieve a certain high percentage average, you don't need scholarships. You don't need that elite system of I doing better than that time, where you have those foolish press conferences where you go to the name of this person get 10 ones and 10 twos, and this one get best friend scholarship. Why are you doing that? It seems very much that we still have a very stratified education system. Okay, we still have a very stratified education system, and it means therefore it exposes certain inefficiencies where you have a cream of students doing very well and others at the bottom not doing well. No, real education reform takes those from the bottom and puts them all the way to the top, and there's no need for elite announcement of success. They are recognized based on merit through hard work. Then let me just end because you said actually.
Yeah, we have our next guest in the house. Yeah.
Yes, any education reform must prepare students for the future. Okay, and it is essential because the world is changing. Okay, we have technological advancements, we have an evolving job market which requires a diverse set of skills and critical thinking and problem solving and digital literacy. Okay. And education reform must also address alternative career paths. All right, and that will focus on updating our curricula with integrated technology, which fosters innovative teaching practices, which are crucial, I think, for equipping students with the skills they need in the 21st century. Two last points: education reform needs to foster civic engagement and democracy. And when you look at the Dominican society today, you have many people saying, "I'm not interested in politics. I'm not interested in that. I don't listen to news. I'm not this." That is a failure of our education system.
That's true. That's true.
Any education system must foster civic engagement. Every citizen has an obligation and a responsibility to become engaged in the democratic process.
That's true.
And so education plays a vital role in fostering civic engagement and strengthening democracy. The less you have education reform, the more weak your democratic system is. And so reform efforts that emphasize, one, critical thinking. Critical thinking. We must bring that into our education system instead of rote learning. You know, too many of our schools teach for procedural knowledge.
They've listed that. They've listed that on the goals that I saw.
Yeah,
there.
you see an exam and you pass and you go to the next level.
Yeah.
But they can't think critically. They can problem solve. You know, a real education system encourages civic education, media literacy, and helps our students to become active. Listening to the news, reading a newspaper, an article, and dissecting it. That's what the great education system, and a real education reform in fostering civic engagement and democracy must provide students with knowledge and skills to participate in the democratic process. Education reform, I think, can contribute to the development of more engaged and informed groups of voters. Mm. And in conclusion, Richie, if I may say, if we focus on the key components, such as one, curriculum standards, teacher development, school choice, assessment and school accountability, technology integration, education reform can create a more equitable, effective, and future-ready education system. Because each component is crucial in what I think is in shaping a robust and inclusive education system that prepares students for the 21st century. Again, in closing, societies will continue to evolve. Education reform will remain vital in shaping the minds and futures of generations to come. And so if we are committed to the principles of equity, innovation, maybe excellence, education reform can help build a brighter and a more bright future for all of us. So the question is, what will education reform be like? Okay? And what will the process be? What are the things we're going to have to grapple with and grow with? What are the new challenges? How will our schools evolve? How will teacher training constantly improve? What will our schools look like in terms of their looks, in terms of, and will they be broader? Will they be more personalized? Will our students be able to change, and will schools be able to change to meet them? And so I want to say that, but again, I will say it is regrettable in closing that education reform has to be, the articulation of education reform has to be led by the Prime Minister of a country. When you have a Minister of Education who's supposed to drive policy, who's supposed to drive change. That's what H.L. Christian did. That's why there's so many blueprints in Dominica when H.L. Christian was Minister of Education. That's what W.S. Stevens did. That's why there's so many signposts in Dominica when W.S. Stevens was Minister of Education. That's what Charles Maynard did. That's why there have been so many changes in the education system. But our past few ministers of education, to my mind, regrettably, perhaps maybe have been found in too much depth, listening to too much gossip, playing too much party politics, being too involved in micromanagement of schools, without sitting down and seeing what new philosophies, principles, and practices they can put in place to embrace their role as minister to drive and lead the education system in Dominica.
Simeon Joseph, thank you for your contribution. Ladies and gentlemen, that was social scientist and former educator Simeon Joseph. Giving a full presentation on his analysis of our government's effort to pursue education reform. One of the major questions being asked: on what basis are these new goals put forward by the government established? Where's the data that will drive this new change in policy? I suspect we'll have to revisit. This is ongoing, huh? We'll have to revisit education reform in a part 3. Joining me in studio at this time is our next guest. But I'm sure a few of you wanted to call in, so we can take 2 calls. The numbers to call: 449-3095, 449-3096, 3097. Overseas line 305-432-9624. Special good afternoon to Marlene. Good afternoon to Jasmine Carlton. Good afternoon, brother. Sarah Abraham, good afternoon to you. Good afternoon to Beverly. Good afternoon to David. Mariana, good afternoon. Education reform in Dominica. Caller, you're live.
Good afternoon, Richie.
Good afternoon.
And I want to commend Mr. Simeon. And at the end of the day, the government not interested in that. All the government is interested in is to pick up votes. We don't realize the government haven't got no time to educate people in Dominica and to move this country forward. All the government concern is to pick up votes. They come and put lights on the people into free. That, to me, what is that about? Just for votes. Everything the government does is for vote, Richie. And people like Simeon, they need to be complimented and for the government to really put him into a good position to run the education system in Dominica. Because everything, and as Simeon said, everybody that's in position in the education system is politics. People that know the job, they put them aside and they put their political people. Everything happening in Dominica is to catch a vote. The government don't do nothing in Dominica to advance its people and to educate us and to move forward. Everything the government do for 25 years is to catch a vote. They build some houses, and Scott said everybody in the houses is labor rights to catch a vote. That's all they care. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Good afternoon. You're live.
Blessings to you, Richie. What's up?
I'm doing good. How are you, brother?
I did giving thanks. Richie, I've been following that gentleman there. And Richie, in Dominica, it may be so in other Caribbean countries, I don't know. On an international level, I know most of the time, maybe America is an exception. People look for people that have a high level of expertise rather than nepotism, Richie. You know, you're looking for your friends and your family to put into certain position, even if they're not qualified, Richie. The square pegs in wrong hole, no? So to hell with the system, to hell with your students or your children. My children were born in America, and my children are not going to your little primary school, you know, because my children going into private school where, you know, higher education and all of that. So it is so sad, Richie, to see the same people that will aid and abet in the demise of the future of our children or risking the potential, the untapped ability of our children. We'll be the ones who turn around tomorrow and say, you see, when their mother send them to school, they did not want, and they start to criticize them. That's have a lot of issues with people who can sit down and start to talk about young people, this and young people that. The brother have articulated all the areas, as usual, where we are falling short. But guess what? Tell them to go and, how do you say, don't shake the pampalam, Richie? Remember shake the pampalam?
There's a whole song on it now, Blessings. There's a whole song on it now, man. There's a song on it.
No.
If you want to pay your rent, Blessings, you shake your pampalam, Blessings.
Yeah. One time people were talking about, school tuition for children that went overseas and studies. And when a minister of education say, all you want government to do everything for you, all you have to go and shake all your pampalam. Interesting. So when you have that level of idiocy and mediocrity and caution, Richie, what do you expect from a country? So let me give thanks to the brother for his contribution as usual. But at the same time, Richie, it seems like there is no end in sight, Have a blessed day, sir.
Shake your pampalam, huh? Ah, boy. What a thing. Let's move on to our next guest. Let's take one more call. Caller, you're live.
Good. Richie?
Yes, good afternoon.
I couldn't sit by and not tell Simeon, congratulations and keep that up, keep the fight on. Simeon brings me right to the days when I was in village council with his father and these people, days when Mr. Libla, I served in the house with Libla from 70 to 75 these days and so on. I want to tell him continue the good work. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, let's go to our next special guest for this afternoon. A man of great intelligence who has sacrificed so much for the Commonwealth of Dominica and still adding value to our society. A former teacher and former district education officer, Mr. Arundel Thomas. Mr. Thomas, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you, Richie. You're an amazing character. I want to tell you how much I appreciate your invitation to be here.
Yeah.
I want to say good afternoon to the listeners and the callers and to my former friend and student, I might say, Simeon. Simeon is a passionate, intelligent, educated, practical person.
Yeah.
You see what Simeon telling you there? He was once the head teacher, first at the foundation school in Marigot. And this guy was amazing. He was down to earth, really interested in the development of the students. And then he headed the grammar school, another amazing professional task, and work he did there. So he's not talking out of his head. He's not. Simeon is not a former educator. Simeon Joseph is an educator. And you can tell from the way he presents the information, the way he's grounded in what he said.
He's abreast with what's going on.
And when he knows it, he makes his research. And, in fact, he brought me back a lot of things. He said here, with respect to the CARICOM, the EDIF CARICOM heads of government meeting. So, and if you notice, there's a nexus between what he said and what we discussed with respect to the Education
Yes,
Act.
there was,
That is the responsibility of the minister. And we
education minister
to give action, reality, and implement the Education Act. The law requires that. But before we continue, though, you had a very interesting program yesterday with I think it had to do with the child, protecting the child and stuff like that.
Yeah, child abuse in Dominica.
More than that, you spoke to somebody from the Kalinago from
yes, two persons, Marlon James and Amanda Theodore.
Right. You also spoke to the person at the Alpha Center.
Yes, Aisha Walsh.
And then did you speak to Mrs. Beverly?
Yes, Beverly Libla of the Achievement Learning Center.
These people perform a dedicated and important task in protecting and developing, giving support to the more vulnerable among us.
Correct.
And and they're not, in my view, they're not sufficiently appreciated.
Yeah, we need to support them more as a nation.
As
these three agencies.
As a nation, and what they didn't tell you is the lack of funding, the lack of resources from the government. They wouldn't want to come and say that because they probably would be afraid of, if they do say it, they probably wouldn't get some nasty feedback. But if the government paid attention, you have to pay attention to all sectors of education, and that's an important sector.
Correct.
And while I say that, I want to pause to pay respect to some persons who have served in special education area, like, I don't know if you know Mrs. Hurl Lancelot.
I've heard of her, yeah.
That lady and Mrs. Francis, they were the first persons I knew, there probably were others, who were teaching at the hearing impaired, the school for the hearing impaired. These persons did a fantastic job. And Beverly herself, there were other persons, but Beverly Leblanc herself, she was passionate about special education. I worked with Beverly in the Ministry of Education. When you hear Beverly talk, she was really a promising, intelligent, progressive person. She wanted to see things happen for special education people.
Yeah.
There was a lady by the name of Claudine Edwards, who was also heading the hearing impaired, the school for the hearing impaired, with Miss John Kerr at the time and Miss Prince and others. These people, we just dump them on the back bushes of history. But these people need to be recognized for doing the work, working with more, and it brought Alpha Center as well, working with the more vulnerable among us. These children that, some of them have difficulties, learning challenges, and so on. And Mrs. Murphy, those working with the blind, like Mrs. Christian, deceased, Mrs. Murphy, that is Natalie Murphy, DAPD. Right. So these people deserve special attention for the dedication to working with the vulnerable persons, vulnerable children and vulnerable adults. So I want to thank you for having me here. It's an exciting time to be here. But you can never be bored when Simeon is on the radio because he's engaging, and so on. So we can move on, I suppose.
Yes. At this time, we're still on education.
Yes, indeed.
And we're talking school attendance, the view of school attendance right now. From your experience being in the sector for so many years, what are the main factors contributing to chronic absenteeism, chronic absenteeism and tardiness among students in schools?
Yeah, well, first of all, we have to try to tie that to the time we have with the question of school discipline.
Yeah. And
we go back to the origin of the platform for our conversation, which is the law. Remember, I said it is the platform for our conversation. I had the pleasure of meeting the person who drafted the Education Act, Mary Harris, and he was talking about laws and the immutable laws that provide a framework for the world, for the universe to exist, without chaos. And he's talking, and if, for instance, the moon has to follow a particular course. The earth has to follow a particular course, day and night, and the sun must be in a particular way so that we can get day and night and life can proceed, it can exist. So laws are important to reduce chaos and to reduce the risk of collapse. And I want to go back to that subject, to that point, because you see the grammar school collapse, and we wonder whether it was because we failed to pay attention to the laws that govern construction and planning and all that stuff in Dominica. So again, we go to the Act to speak about school attendance, and I'd like to include matters of school discipline as well. Now, the purpose of the Act, I want to, again, Simeon referred to the Act. He's a wise guy, and he referred to the Act. The purpose of this Act, that's the Education Act, which is to be implemented by the minister, with all the professionals she has, then now, and then Simeon made reference to the professionals that existed in the time, in planning, in not just planning, in curriculum. We had units there, and the school maintenance unit as well. And of course, the operations system, where you have the school operations and all that. And what has it become now? You know, in the 1990s, under the BURP that he mentioned, the reform program, we were able to send people like myself and others to do guidance counseling and education, guidance counseling and learning support at Bristol University in the United States of America, to come back and to assist with the smooth management of the education system. And we worked with, as I told you, we worked with a team of bright stars, bright sparks. And, you know, people were involved in doing the work to improve education in Dominica. So the Act now, the purpose, I want to revert to that. I want to remind people. And Simeon, I'm hanging on to Simeon because he makes the point that we, all persons who are interested in the advancement of education, we've reduced chaos, we've reduced risk of collapse, that the Education Act is the tool, the instrument that provides guidance for how we manage our education system, to provide for an orderly and orderly and coordinated development of a relevant, of a varied. Those things are so important, because all the question of changing curriculum, changing education, how we do things, that is captured in this definition, is it of the purpose of the Education Act. Varied and comprehensive educational system in Dominica characterized by excellence. So all the things you talk about, attendance and discipline, that's all covered under the Education Act. But we went further. The Education Act was drafted by Ray Harris. We implemented School Education Act regulations to the Education Act. Now, the regulations, what they do is that they distill the Act into details that can make it easier to implement them. So I took the trouble of getting a copy of the regulations for you. They speak, and it's a large document, but they speak a lot about discipline and so on. But let's talk about attendance. Let's begin with the issue raised about school attendance. And the best place to start is in the Education Act. Yeah, man. Did I say good afternoon to my listeners? And I think I recognize the voice of Mr. Tavini from the Supre there in one of the calls there. And Brother Blessings, did Brother Blessings call you? He always calls. I'm always interested and excited when Blessings calls, because this man has a lot to offer. So Division C of the Education Act speaks to the question of admission and attendance, admission to school and the attendance at school. And it's important to read. Reading is important. Oh boy, this is good stuff. It says here, every child shall attend school from the first day of the school calendar in the school year, following that in which he attains the lower age of the compulsory school age until the last day of the school calendar in the school year in which is school. Now, it sounds complicated, but the education regulations specify the lower age for school. Now, we have early childhood education, and that's a separate act. It's a separate act governing early childhood education. For primary school, 5 years. If you reach 5 years within the school year, you are eligible to attend primary school. And the regulations speak to the matter, the issue of school attendance in that regard. And then it talks about how a child shall not be admitted to primary school unless at the time of admission the child is accompanied by a parent. So that's the early part of attendance. The person accompanying the child shall bring various documents, and it also speaks to the question of immunization and to protect other students from sicknesses like, if your child is immunized, it's less likely. I know there's a lot of issue and conflict and story about vaccines and, and all that. I don't want to embroil myself or anybody into that long conversation, but the law requires, I mean, there are pros and cons, and everybody's entitled to their views on that. But then the law provides for you to be immunized before you enter school. A child shall not, without written permission, that's you're in attendance, Section 28 of the Education Act. A child shall not, without the written permission of the Chief Education Officer, be admitted to a primary school other than in September. All right.
So that's where. Tell me where you are, because
I was looking at Section 28, subsection 2 of the Education Act, or the beginning of the primary school year, and then you shall not be right. And then he talks about attendance at a secondary school not below age 10, unless, of course, you get permission from the prime ministers. You see that there, right? Section 29 speaks to the attendance at secondary school. It says you shouldn't be less than 10 years. But I've noticed going earlier than that. But Section 29(2) provides for a child of less than 10, below 10 years, to attend secondary school. So the law is not like a stiff, static document. It provides leeway,
some flexibility,
a lot of flexibility. It's a great act. It was drafted by Ray Harris, a brilliant and intelligent legal scholar, and our regulations were drafted by my partner I call Muspa, by Mr. John Charles, Attorney John Charles, another brilliant mind. It took time to draft these regulations to the act to ensure that, Richie, things are not done vike. You don't go on a stage and and dance around saying what you want to do and what you do not want to do. It has to be orderly, and the law provides for that orderliness. And reference was made to the minister so often, because you wonder whether we have people here that know what they are being paid these humongous salaries for. This just to, I was going to say, lick the butt of a prime minister, but I cannot say that on the radio, or to do the work that would move our country or nation forward. You understand what I mean? So these are questions that come to my mind sometimes. No. Section 30. The principals of every school shall maintain a register of students, which shall be known as the students' register. You remember the school registers, Richie?
I remember that.
Right. Even before we had the Education Act, we had the school registers. Right? When I was going to school, I'm a very old man now. We had registers and so on. And then the law requires that there be a register. And, the law requires that the student register must include, upon admission, the name, a telephone number, address, date of birth of the student, so they can have access to this parent or somebody, the student, when necessary, the date of admission, the name and residence of the student's parent, because sometimes some parents stay in different places, some stay in state, some out of state, but some an adult who can be responsible for that child.
Mm-hmm.
Where appropriate, the date the student left school from which, so if it's a transfer, from one school to another, that also is included and addressed in the Education Act, and so on. The standard class where the child was before they went. Now, I want to deal with a section that talks about Division D. I want to go to enforcement, the question you raise. Let's go to Division D, Section 36 of the Education Act. So you talk about school attendance. And you've noticed, you've said that a lot of students, not today, And I met a couple of students in the country from the Southern District area. When they moved the students from their school, the JSP students, to have them to go to another school, because they were closing only JSP in one of the schools and they were transferring to another school. A lot of them just didn't attend school. They failed to attend school. Many times you just see students not at school and you wonder what's happening. I remember when I was a young boy growing up, they were the school officers like Mr. Edwards. He was a gentleman who looked around for students who didn't attend school that were making tobacco. And you know what tobacco is? You can know what tobacco is, my boy.
I know.
You know what tobacco is?
I know.
Okay, you know what tobacco.
Yeah,
So he looking for students that were making tobacco, and Mr. Edwards used to hold them and make sure that they attend school. We see in the law a kind of a similar position that would try to enforce attendance at schools. So that wasn't crafted in law, but the system was good enough to have people that would then address these things. So Mr. Edwards was a gentleman, and there was what they called a skerrit. Have you heard of the name skerrit? Okay, yeah. You wouldn't know. You think I'm not talking about the prime minister, but but there was a building. I think the gentleman that was headed that place was Mr. Skerrit at Monbruce, where delinquent students were placed. It was like a holding for students that were not subjecting themselves to discipline and rules. So there was a place where they put them to discipline them, like a boarding. What do you call those schools?
Boarding school.
No, not really boarding.
Boot camp.
A boot camp school, right? So they call it a skerrit. You see any similarities?
Name it after him.
Do you see any similarities here? No, you haven't seen no. So let us talk about enforcement of compulsory school attendance. Section 36, Division D, Section 36 of the Education Act addresses that. And it says, subject to Section 37, which we shall read in a while, the parents. So you notice where the emphasis is? The parents of every child of compulsory school age shall ensure that the child receives an education by regular attendance at school. You have that? Section 36, Division D, Section 36 of the Education Act. Got it? The parents are the ones that are responsible for ensuring that the children attend school. So if you find children are not attending school, the ones that have to be held to account, the minor that are in school, would have to be the parent. Section 37. Subsection 1. Subject to subsection 2 to 6, a child of compulsory school age is exempted from school attendance if the minister, the minister is satisfied after consultation with the chief education officer that the child is receiving adequate
instruction.
So you have homeschooling. And you know, the Education Act makes provision for homeschooling. So some parents are able of delivering a homeschooling education for the children. And law provides for that. The Education Act, in its wisdom, provides for that. So if the chief is satisfied, there's a process that has to be followed to register you as a homeschool, for homeschooling. So you can get recognition and approval from the ministry, from the chief education officer, from the minister, and the chief education officer, And so if you get adequate schooling at home, instructions at home, and your parents are capable, and there have been many children who have been homeschooled in Dominica, and they've done exceptionally well. So if you have adequate parents that are capable of doing it, it can be done. B, the child is excluded from attendance at school under any provision of this act or regulation. You will come to that later. C, the child is unable to attend school because of sickness, because of danger of infection. Like if you have carrying a contagious disease and you have to protect the other children, you have to, or the child is herself or himself subject to certain things, because some children have compromised immune systems and they cannot attend school with the regular children, Yeah, some of them. So some of them, So all these things have been taken into account here. Infirmity, like if you have a special need, you cannot go to the regular school system. Although what they try to do many times is to integrate students, unless, in some schools they talk about integration, where you are even a blind guy. I think there was a blind student at the grammar school, visually, what's it, St. Mary's Academy?
I think so.
Right. So if you have the technology now that can allow persons with disabilities to attend regular school, it's good for their social health. If you can get them among other students and get students to appreciate that even if they do have a disability, they are normal people.
They're not defined by their disability.
They're not defined by their lack of certain abilities. And that is challenging, and probably if you have to do that well, you have to invest a lot of money, a lot of resources to make it work well. So, you might decide, well, all the students that attend this school for the hearing impaired can go to the normal school, they can go to state college. I've been to universities where you have blind students in the regular classes.
But I mean, Dominica, some years ago, and I know him well, I actually met him over the weekend. Mr. Loic Charles is a prime example.
He's the guy from Canefield.
Yeah.
I think that's the guy that went to the academy.
He has a bachelor's degree.
Exactly.
In I believe it's information technology.
I think I've heard
sociology.
But so even while I'm saying that, do you see where we're going with that conversation you had yesterday about vulnerabilities, about our vulnerable members of society? How much resource, how much money, how much of the government's CBI money is being pumped into that aspect of our education system? Can you tell me that, Rishi? No, we haven't got that information. So if a child has certain disabilities, infirmities, or if because of a serious illness of the parent or other related causes, so the act is taking all these things into account to say there may be certain occasions where children may not be able to attend regular classes. And let's go to the next one, attendance at school. If the child is suffering from a mental or physical disability that, in the opinion of the registered medical practitioner, makes a student incapable of being educated by ordinary methods of instruction. So you have to be suffering from a severe situation, because as we said a while ago, people with hearing disabilities, abilities, or visual disabilities can be integrated into the regular school systems if they have to. And the child is granted permission by the principal of the school to be temporarily absent from school. That's normal routine stuff. For good or sufficient reasons, you have to go. Some Christian people, they have certain religious festivals, or you have to travel with your parents for some purpose, or with somebody else. You can be granted permission to be out of school. The child is a participant in a religious. You see, the act allows for people that have their feasts and so on. There are certain religious groups that have Feast of Tabernacles and so on, and children are allowed to practice their religion because the Constitution gives all citizens a right to practice their religion. Muslim religion, Yahweh religion, and Pentecostal religion, Adventists, they have a right as a student to practice your religion. The law, the Education Act, cannot violate the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Dominica. Now, Richie, let me give you a personal experience here. Because I told you, one of my responsibilities and duties was to promulgate, to go and share the law, spread the wonderful beauty of the Education Act. And I went to certain schools, and the act says, even if a student is attending an assisted private school, a religious assisted private school, so we have them here, like we have the St. Martin's School, we have the Convent High School, the St. Mary's Academy, Wesley High School, and all of them. By law, and the Constitution supports that, you cannot force the student to attend religious activities I got a lot of resistance when I tried to explain that was a law, because some people felt, they were coming to the religious schools and they had sort of committed themselves to attending those religious activities and so on. So I still feel that people are not very happy with that. And then, so there are certain things that people feel, even if it's not the legal thing to do, they feel that they will violate it anyway because of their religious views and things supersede the Constitution. No religious views supersede the Constitution. You follow what I mean? The Constitution is the supreme law
of the land,
and the Act has to reflect what is expected and written and stated in the
law,
in the Constitution. The education law, and it does precisely that. And in certain sections, I won't go there. Let's talk about that again. So we talk about attendance at school. So if you have been suspended, so that we were talking a while ago about celebrations of religious activities recognized by the religious community. If you have been suspended for school in accordance with the law, with the Act, you cannot come back to school. You shouldn't attend school. If you're engaged in a work experience, and you see the law, the Act makes allowance for a diversity in the curriculum so that students can be engaged. You see that here? In work experience. So as Simeon was pointing out, I have to refer to that great guy here. Education is not just that little academic thing is go and sit down in a classroom and people pour things into, they filter stuff into your brain. The very reading of that section of the Act here, B, it says if you have a work experience, if you're out on work experience or other educational programs authorized by the approved principal, so it provides for education to be engaging, diverse, education to allow you to be out of the classroom, out of a little box of a classroom. And as we speak about that, we see the major schools they're building, they're all boxes, with tinned windows and cubicles. That's what the idea of education is. The idea of education is for children to come sit down in a little frame, a little box or something like that, and a teacher's in front of you writing on a chalkboard or maybe even on a computer screen or something. But we have to make education diverse, make education engaging. And then the child is representing the state in an educational, cultural. If you're representing the state in sports, in drama, or something, you are exempted from attending school. Let's go back again. Section 2 of subsection 2 of section 37. The parent of a child of compulsory school age who wishes the child to be exempted from school attendance under subsection, as we mentioned here, must apply for a certificate of exemption for permission from the school in accordance with the law. An application made, and it detail how the application should be made. You know what I mean? And it's the chief education officer that authorizes that.
Grants, yeah.
You see, they're trying to make sure that the prime minister have enough work opportunities, enough time to do the major things, to attend to the policies, national development, agricultural policies in general, that would go and get money, use the CBI money to advance education, use the CBI money to advance agriculture, use the CBI money to advance.
As you mentioned, money, the budget, I can tell you and the public that we allocated for the Ministry of Education between 2024 to 2025 is about 70 million.
Yeah, but again, I do not know what methodology was they used to arrive at that. I know when I was in Department of Education, we had a corporate plan for education, which fed or informed the Ministry of Finance. I think Ricky Broom, I can call his name now. He used to be in finance, and we met with the financial secretary. We met with the people in finance. We presented our proposals in a corporate plan, a sector plan, subsector plan, and that informed the government as to how much money will be required. Obviously, as I said, government can never have something all the money you want all the money they would like to have, well, not governments in the past. I'm saying that deliberately. They were very limited with respect to the amount of money they had. But, because you never have all the money you need to invest in to make education what you want it to be. But at least there was an informed process. And it began long before the budget was kind of due. We had that the plan, the corporate plan, the subsector plan with our objectives and the things we wanted to do, the programs, and that informed the budget. Nowadays, I believe there's a lot of chaos and arbitrariness in how these things are done. That's what I believe. So I'm not too sure about how they arrived at the 70 million. I'm not even sure whether they're going to actually use the 70 million, because this government has a habit of putting big figures down, hundreds of millions there, thousands of millions there. And we know, I'm not saying that loosely, that they never use the money. They put money in sports. Let's say they put 15 million and they use 2 million. And then they have to get another 15 million loan to do what they were supposed to. The thing is, so I do not know what how they arrived at the 70 million. However, so we were talking about school attendance, and we're still here. The chief education officer does the stuff. He gives a certificate and whatever it is. So the minister, let's go to 38. I'm not going to read every little detail here. The minister may by order designate school attendance counselors. So that speaks to the core of the question you raised about mandatory school attendance. So the Education Act talks about a system for ensuring that delinquent students that are delinquent can be forced, obliged to attend school. And the way the Act uses that is by allowing the minister, empowering the minister, if so desired, to designate what we call school attendance counselors. It's similar to what Mr. Frank Edwards was doing, looking for the stray guys, the delinquent students, and trying to make sure they were captured, so to speak, and they attended school. He didn't beat them or anything. So the minister may, by order, designate school attendance counselors. That's a nice name. To assist teachers in the counseling of children of compulsory school age and the parents, and in the enforcement of the compulsory attendance provisions of this Act. So all children of school age, whatever is the legal school age is, should be, the law requires that they be at a school. Have you ever been anywhere at a school time between 9 and say 12 or 4 or 3:30 and seen children that you probably recognize to be of school age just out of school?
Very not often.
How often do you go out to the country and so on?
I have seen, I wouldn't call this school,
No,
the name of the school, no. But I have seen one or two students trying to
make to back.
Yeah. But I don't think, well, I could be wrong. I don't see much of these counselors as the law states, which would ensure that these children don't make the two back as you.
Yeah, so I'm not too sure if we really follow the law from after 2000 to establish make any serious effort to establish school attendance counselors. I don't know if they didn't see the need for that, or they didn't feel they had the money to get it done. But an important point was raised in your earlier conversation with my Bryce back here, Simeon, with respect to school reform. And one of the things that the law provides for is a scheduled report on the state of education. That state we had one for 2003. I recall that was presented in Parliament. And in the last time we were here, we talked about every 5 years or thereabout, a document is laid before Parliament on the state of education in Dominica, presenting the data that will inform what we need to do to improve, advance, and develop our education system. And the minister has to be asked, when was the last state of education report tabled in Parliament?
We need that.
So that will inform not only what reforms need to take place, but how much more money, how much less money, how much must be budgeted for education. Anything else outside of that is just arbitrary, power la bush kind of behavior. And in 2025, Dominica should not be moving into education things by with a power la bush, glib, unserious, to say, kind of approach. We have to take the approach to education development seriously, because there are detrimental consequences, if we don't practice, if we don't do things in an organized and orderly manner in education. That's why the Education Act is there. And then our brother raised the question: how many teachers read the Education Act? How many principals? When when I did school management in the States and stuff like that, education management. When you do education administration in America, you must study the laws. They have to study school laws. You have to be aware and familiar with the laws of the schools, school laws, education law. You have to do that. I'm not a lawyer, but I know that it's important to do what the laws are that govern whatever profession you're in. If you're an attorney, if you're how you call that, broker in insurance business, if you're an educator, and you must know what laws govern your profession. You're a media guy. Are there any laws that govern media in Dominica?
That remains to be seen.
But do you think it will be important and useful to have laws governing, guiding how your work as a media person, your protections?
Well, we should, but I suspect there's a fear, because I was speaking, not to go off topic, but
it's on topic.
It's on topic. I was speaking with some professionals in the region, in my field, and they were telling me that they suspect a lot of the governments, some of them are afraid to tackle communications law, because if they do, then the whole talk of the
freedom of information.
Right. Freedom of...
They don't want you to know.
Freedom of...
So you see?
And they don't want to go into that, because the more empowered your media is, the stronger democracy and the stronger the ideas of opposition.
So what the law will do in education, in media, is give you a platform to perform with confidence and with the protection of the constitution of the law. So there's an ambit, there's within which you can perform. And I wanted to say that before I was practicing that. Law is not a punitive tool. You see today in our current situation in Dominica, you get a sense that our government is looking at law as something to punish people, to see how they break the law for you to put them in jail and put them in front of the court, and when they come to court, they waste their nice, precious time, obey you invited them to court, you tell them to come to court on a certain day. When they reach there, then you tell them, I don't already yet. I'm saying I don't have to get my higher class lawyers before I begin the case. You see how disrespectful and punitive that is. Now, law is not punitive. I want to go back to that. You have the 10 Commandments. And the laws in the 10 Commandments are: do not kill. That's to protect people. Love God. Love your brother and sister. Do not do things that do not lie about, that is, give false testimony. And stuff like that. And Christ reviewed the law. Love God and love your brother and sister. He even said to love your enemies. So a law is not a punitive instrument. And certain dictatorships, they use law to punish their people. The Education Act is a progressive piece of legislation, because Mr. Harris was careful to make sure, Ray Harris, I have to give him all credit for that he writes things that will make people develop and grow. But there are certain consequences to not following the law. They are not punishments, but consequences. So let's talk about that again. Let's continue. So the minister, he says, may appoint school attendance counselors to facilitate attendance at schools. Then this person must have certain qualifications. He mustn't. I remember we had one so-called counselor who was just a political appointee. The law doesn't. If you want a job to be done properly, you have to ensure that the person who is appointed to the job has the qualifications, the aptitude, the general wherewithal to perform. The brother was pointing out to taking a person from.
I think, and what I'm getting from you, Mr. Thomas, and as well as Mr. Joseph, who we spoke to a while ago, is the need for proper placement, staffing of personnel and professionals rather than people who support the administration. Because what we've seen is there appears to be too many people who are in positions of the government who are supposed to carry out duties, who are supposed to provide assistance, but they are so politically aligned that they forget their duty and they look at if you support a party, even when it comes to doing their professional work, as opposed to, okay, you've brought something feasible, let's see what we can do, let's see how we can get you assistance, or let's look at this problem at the schools, how do we reassess this, how do we reevaluate this, and actually get work done that benefit the nation. So there's too much of a party on the back type of culture within education.
Very comprehensively summarized. Very well done. So hear that. So if they want to follow the law, the essence of the law is to work towards excellence. And you cannot work towards excellence if you're putting people that are not capable of doing the work in positions of authority and guide to do the work. You know what I mean? If you're not a carpenter, why you want to go and put build windows and doors and stuff like that for people? You have a kaikoshi, and you know what I mean. You don't have a kaikoshi in education, and then that's precisely where the problem is, because they are violating the law. They're violating law, and we make reference to let those persons who are responsible for implementing agriculture, health, education, the persons that are getting all the money, they're being paid, and this morning you were making reference to how much thousands of dollars they got in increase. When teachers that are doing the hard work in the classroom are getting 0.03.
The salary for teachers need to be raised. I mean, that's across the board.
All
Lecturers included.
The policemen. Don't forget the nurses, my brother.
And the nurses.
Yeah, man, and the messengers too.
We
need
to look at. The minimum wage.
People working in the library.
I mean, just yesterday again, St. Kitts. $12.50, man.
There you go. So the point I'm making is, these people get well paid and.
Way over time.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to complete that because but I don't regret that happened, because we got a very exciting opening from Simeon. So I think so. Let's just get two more points here, and we'll have to wrap up. Okay. So let's talk about the school attendance counselor, because one of the issues I wanted to raise was school discipline, because that's a pesky area.
I wanted to touch into that. Yeah.
So we have to make a time when we can talk about school discipline.
Yes.
And what are the responsibilities of the teachers, the students, and what does the law say, the Dominica Education Act say about discipline in school? You'll find it amazing. I'm leaving the copy of the regulations for use, the act and the regulations that speak specifically to give more detailed information about school discipline. Let's just finish that school attendance matter. It says, a school attendance counselor shall ensure that section 36, that's school attendance matters, is complied with in respect to all children of compulsory school age within the district or area to which he is assigned. So you have 4 educational districts and you have secondary schools. So the law is providing for appointing, if necessary, a school attendance counselor for each of the districts. That person will have the responsibility for going around to ensure that all children who are supposed to be at school are at home or in the garden when they're supposed to be at school trying to learn something. And 40, for the purposes of section 39, a school attendance counselor who has reasonable cause, here is important here, to believe that a person is in contravention of this act or regulation with respect to attendance at school, may at any reasonable time, whether during school hours or not, upon presentation of his credentials to the person, present on the premises. In other words, you go to a home or you go to a garden and you see a child who's supposed to be at school, a student, a minor, not at school. So this school attendance counselor can enter the premises by law You're authorized to do that. Enter the premises. You can make inquiries. Why is Jeff Prince not at school today? You follow me? As are necessary to determine whether Section 36 is being complied with or whether anyone is in contravention of Section 45, which will come to you in a while later. 45 in section, in relation to a child of compulsory school age whom he has reasonable cause to believe to be frequently visiting, residing, employed on the premises. So, like, if you have a child who's supposed to be at school selling in a shop during school hours, you follow what I mean? Or in a bar, or being certain places, by a boat, going and catch fish. During school hours when you're supposed to be at school, the authority is given to the school attendance counselor
to enter the premises
at
that time
and so on.
Question each other.
Right, you can stop any child. It says stop and question any child who appears to be of compulsory school age and is not at school.
Yeah.
Ask the child his age or her age, his or her name and address, and the school to which the child is registered, and the reason for not being at school, his absence from school or her absence from school, or any other matter relevant to the inquiries referring to paragraph. I'm going to stop here today because there's a lot of exciting other things we need to do.
Yeah.
We also must deal with the matter of school discipline, because I can tell you, my experience it's not very easy. You raise the question of corporal punishment in your little note to me.
Yesterday, yeah.
You know what I found interesting? Like, corporal punishment in Dominica at one point, it was like bread, like a daily diet, a staple. And people felt that if the law didn't insist on children being punished, administered corporal punishment, something was deficient to the law. But the law speaks to corporal punishment. It also speaks to the abolition of corporal punishment. And we'll talk to the regulations that distill the question of corporal punishment. Corporal punishment is beating children, applying physical strokes to them. So next time we come, we'll continue that conversation. I want to thank you, the listeners, for hearing us. Well, today was a loss, because the brother before me was just like dynamic and he was engaging.
No,
we have a lot more to talk about.
There's a lot more, because education is a very big, meticulous. There's a lot to unpack with that type of profession. So very interesting. We have to wrap up at this time. I know a lot of you would like to call at this time. Good afternoon to Marlene again and Medora. Good afternoon, Miss Defoe. Good afternoon to you as well. That's all the time we have today for Talk on the Block on this edition. Quite engaging, quite informative. A special thank you to our first guest, Mr. Simeon Joseph, former educator and social scientist, and of course, our present guest, who is now making his leave, former teacher and former district education officer, Mr. Arundel Thomas. Thomas, thank you again. Thank you,
all listeners. Thank you.
Jackpot is now over $400,000. You have to be in it to win it. Get your tickets today.
We are in the Atlantic hurricane season. Stay tuned to radio and television stations for regular bulletins. Rely only on official bulletins. Do not check these over the telephone. A message from Q95 FM Radio.
Need one trusted place to stock up for your home, shop, or business? Fine Foods Inc. Distribution has got you covered. From dry goods and frozen foods to your favorite drinks, alcoholic and non-alcoholic, plus all the household must-have. We've got it all under one roof. We're right here in Jimmy Dominica, and yes, we deliver fast. Whether you're running a supermarket, a corner shop, a bar, or just like your pantry full and happy, Fine Foods Inc. brings you the best brands you know and love. Great prices, top-tier service, trusted products. 255-6810 or 316-0164, or drop by our Jimmy location to check out what's in store. Fine Foods Inc.
Fine Foods Inc. The biggest distributor for the biggest brand. Bring your cooler. Bring your cooler. Bring your cheese. What's your cheese? If you're number one all over. Number one. Make ready in Dominica. Right here. When you come in the jam, you should have a baby in your hand. When you come in the pan, you should have a baby in your hand. What we drinking? DVB style. DVB nice. DVB style. DVB nice. DVB style. DVB nice. DVB style. DVB nice. BB Spice Rum. It's more than just a rum.
BB Spice Rum, distributed by Belfast Estate.